The drive home from work should have been my chance to unwind, a little calm after the chaos of the day. It was that brief moment when Hannah and I could decompress together, just the two of us. But, as usual, Hannah had a different agenda. "Hey, Ethan," she said, cutting through the silence. Her voice was cheerful, too cheerful, like she was trying to sell me something. "Guess what?" I glanced at her briefly, keeping my hands steady on the wheel. "What's up?" I asked. "A bunch of us are meeting at McKinley's tonight. You know, that bar near my office. Let's stop by. Just for a little while." I let out a sigh, already feeling the weight of the day pressing down on me. All I could think about was collapsing onto the couch, reheating some leftover pasta, and maybe watching an episode of that crime show we'd been binging. "Hannah, I'm wiped out. Can't we just go home?" "Oh, come on," she said, her tone slipping into that familiar mix of persistence and impatience. "You're always too tired. It's just for a little while. Everyone's been asking about you, they miss seeing you. Your friends miss seeing me?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Of course," she said, flashing a smile that felt just a little too forced. "Don't be such a party pooper." I knew I wasn't getting out of this one. "Fine," I muttered, caving. But not for long. Her face lit up as she started typing away on her phone, letting her friends know we were on the way. Meanwhile, I stared at the road ahead, trying to shake the uneasy feeling settling in my stomach. By the time we got to McKinley's, the place was already alive with noise. The dim lighting and the hum of conversation mixed with the smell of fried food and beer hanging heavy in the air. Hannah led the way to the back of the bar, where a group of her friends was already laughing and clinking their glasses together. As soon as we joined the table, all eyes turned toward us. "Well, look who finally decided to show up." Amber, one of Hannah's louder friends, called out. Her eyes sparkled with mischief as she smirked. "Ethan, did Hannah have to drag you out of the house again?" The table erupted in laughter, and I forced a smile as I slid into the chair Hannah had picked out for me. "Something like that," I said under my breath. The drink started flowing, and, as always, the conversation shifted. It never took long with Hannah's friends. They had a knack for teasing me, and Hannah never stepped in to stop them. If anything, she encouraged it. "So, Ethan," Brian started, leaning forward with a grin that made my skin crawl. "Still crunching numbers all day? Bet that's a real thrill." "Yeah," Amber chimed in, piling on. "How do you even stay awake at work? Or is that why you're always too tired to go out?" Their laughter was grating, and I could feel my patience wearing thin. Hannah took a sip of her drink, a sly smile tugging at her lips. "Oh, don't feel too bad for him," she said with a laugh. "Ethan's perfected the art of looking busy while doing as little as possible." My stomach nodded. I tried to laugh it off, but they just kept going. "Hannah," Brian said, raising his glass, "how do you even put up with him?" "Patience," she said, lifting her own glass. "And wine." The group roared with laughter again, and I felt my face flush. Then Hannah turned to me, her glass raised high. "To Ethan," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "the man who somehow turned being boring into an art form." That was it. I pushed back my chair, the legs scraping against the floor. "I need some air," I said, my voice tight. Hannah barely looked up. "Don't be so sensitive," she said with a casual shrug. "We're just joking." I didn't respond. Instead, I walked straight for the door, letting the cool night air hit me like a slap to the face. Standing outside, I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm the anger boiling inside me. My hands clenched around my phone as I debated whether to call a cab and head home. A few minutes later, my phone lit up with Hannah's name. I hesitated before answering. "Ethan," she said, her voice softer now, almost apologetic. "I love you, okay? Come back inside." I'll make it up to you. Yeah, I said flatly. Sure. She probably thought I was on my way home, but something didn't sit right. I couldn't leave, not yet. Taking one last deep breath, I turned and walked back inside. The scene I walked into stopped me cold. At the corner of the table, Hannah sat with her back to me, leaning in slightly. Sitting next to her was Derek Adams, an old college friend I hadn't seen in years. His face was far too close to hers. And it wasn't just that. His hand was under the table, and the way her body tensed told me exactly where it was. For a moment, I just stood there, my heart pounding so hard it felt like the entire bar could hear it. Then, before I even realized what I was doing, I stormed forward and flipped the table next to them. Glasses shattered, drinks spilled, and the lively chatter in the bar came to an abrupt halt. "What the hell, Ethan?" Hannah screamed, springing to her feet. "You," I spat, pointing directly at Derek. "Get your damn hands off my wife." Derek stood, his face pale but his expression stubborn. "Hey man, calm down. Don't." I cut him off sharply, my voice cold and cutting. "Don't say another word." Without waiting for him to respond, I grabbed Hannah by the wrist and started dragging her toward the door. She stumbled along behind me, her protests drowned out by the roaring in my ears. By the time we reached the car, she was crying, but I couldn't have cared less, not then. I yanked open the passenger door and motioned for her to get in. "Ethan, please, let me explain. Get in." My tone left no room for argument. Hannah climbed into the car, tears streaking her face, and I slammed the door shut behind her. As I walked around to the driver's side, I could feel the weight of the stairs from inside the bar, but their judgment meant nothing to me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The ride home was unbearable. The silence wasn't the kind that brought peace but the kind that made the air feel thick with tension, ready to snap at any moment. Hannah shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her breathing uneven like she was trying to work up the courage to speak. Finally, she turned slightly toward me, her hands wringing together in her lap. "Ethan, listen." "Shut up," I said flatly, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I didn't even glance at her. Not a word. She froze, her lips parting slightly, but she stayed quiet. Good. I couldn't stomach another excuse, another explanation that would only drive the knife deeper. The rest of the drive passed in tense silence, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional crunch of gravel under the tires. When we pulled into the driveway, I killed the engine and got out without a word. Hannah hesitated for a moment before stepping out as well, the soft click of her heels on the pavement the only sound behind me. My mind was racing, a chaotic blend of anger and suspicion. Something about the way she and Derek had been acting didn't sit right with me, and I needed answers. Inside the house, Hannah lingered in the hallway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. I didn't even glance in her direction. Instead, I walked straight to her purse, sitting neatly on the counter like it always did. Reaching in, I pulled out her phone. "Ethan," she said, her voice rising. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. My fingers moved quickly, unlocking the screen. She hadn't even bothered to change her password, and the ease with which I accessed it made my stomach turn. It was like she hadn't even tried to hide what she'd done. The first thing I opened was her messages. My heart sank as I scrolled through the thread with Derek. At first, the text seemed innocent enough. But the further I went, the tone shifted. Flirty remarks. Inside jokes. And then, the messages became outright intimate. "You're the only one who gets me, Derek. I can't stop thinking about you. Last night was incredible. I can't wait to see you again." My chest tightened, and I forced myself to keep scrolling. Then I opened the photos. What I found made me feel sick. Dozens of pictures of Hannah, smiling in ways she hadn't smiled for me in months. Some were casual, but others were far too revealing. Intimate. And there were pictures of Derek too. Shirtless. Smirking like he'd just won the lottery. Ethan, stop. Hannah's voice was frantic now, her footsteps hurried as she followed me into the living room. You're blowing this way out of proportion. I turned to face her, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. Without saying a word, I shoved the phone in her face, scrolling through the messages and photos so she couldn't deny it. What the hell is this? I demanded, my voice low but trembling with anger. Her eyes darted from the phone to me, her face pale. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out, like a fish gasping for air. Ethan, I can explain. Explain. I exploded, my voice rising as the anger I'd been holding back finally boiled over. Explain this, I demanded, shoving the phone toward her, the messages and photos blurring together in my anger. 2 months, Hannah. 2 months of this behind my back. While I was at work, paying the bills, thinking everything was fine. And this is what you've been doing. It's not what you think, she cried, stepping closer, her hands raised like she was trying to calm a wild animal. Derek and I, it's not serious. It was stupid, okay? It didn't mean anything. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. Not serious. Didn't mean anything. Hannah, these messages read like some twisted love story. And those pictures? You don't send those to someone unless you're sleeping with them. She flinched at the word, her eyes brimming with tears. Ethan, please, she begged, her voice breaking. It was a mistake. I love you. You're the one I want to be with, I swear. I didn't let her finish. My fury boiled over, and I grabbed the first thing I saw, her bag. Dumping it onto the floor, I scattered its contents everywhere. Then I snatched up the loose items, her makeup bag, her wallet, her hairbrush, and hurled them toward the window. What are you doing? She screamed, rushing toward me. I ignored her, the adrenaline fueling my every move. Her clothes, her shoes, anything within reach, I grabbed them and tossed them out the window onto the lawn. My chest heaved with each breath, the betrayal cutting deeper with every second. Ethan, stop, she yelled, grabbing at my arm. You're being crazy. I spun around to face her, my voice shaking with rage. Crazy? Crazy is cheating on your husband for months and thinking he'd never find out. Crazy is acting like this is something I'm just supposed to forgive. Her tears were flowing freely now, her face crumpled with desperation. I'll do anything, she sobbed. I'll make it right. Just give me a chance. Get out of my house, I said coldly, my voice barely louder than a whisper. She froze, staring at me like I'd just slapped her. Ethan, no. Please, don't do this. We can fix this. There's nothing to fix, Hannah, I replied, stepping back and pointing toward the door. You made your choice. Now get out. For a moment, she didn't move. She just stood there, her shoulders shaking as sobs racked her body. But when she realized I wasn't going to budge, she finally turned and stumbled toward the door. I watched her go, my chest aching with a mix of fury and heartbreak. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the house, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the silence brought relief. After she stormed out, I stood in the living room, surrounded by the chaos we'd left behind. Her belongings were scattered outside on the lawn, her phone still clutched in my hand, and my heart felt like it was ready to burst. I couldn't just sit there, stewing in anger, I needed answers. Real, concrete answers. That's when it hit me, Rachel. She and Hannah had been close for years, though their recent fallout had driven a wedge between them. At the time, Hannah brushed it off like it was nothing, but now I wondered if Rachel had seen something I hadn't. Maybe she'd known about Derek long before I ever did. I scrolled through my contacts, found Rachel's number, and hit call. It only rang twice before she answered, her voice groggy and laced with confusion. "Ethan? What's going on? It's late." "Rachel," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I need your help. It's about Hannah. And Derek." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her tone was sharper. "Derek? What about him?" My grip tightened on the phone, and I swallowed hard. "I know about them. I saw the messages, the pictures. But I need to know more about him. Who is he, really? What's his deal?" Rachel let out a heavy sigh, the kind that told me she was weighing whether to get involved. "Ethan," she said cautiously, "I don't think." "Rachel, please," I interrupted, desperation creeping into my voice. "If you know anything, I need to hear it. I deserve to know." There was another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear her resolve breaking. Finally, she spoke. "All right, Ethan. Since Hannah didn't tell you, I will," Rachel said, her voice steady but laced with frustration. "Derek's a player. He always has been. He flirts with every woman he meets, sleeps with as many as he can, and then moves on like it's nothing. To him, it's all a game. I told Hannah that when she first started talking to him, but she didn't want to listen. That's why we fought." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. "So, this isn't just a one-time thing?" Rachel hesitated, the pause heavy with unspoken truth. "Probably not. But even if it is, to Derek, Hannah's just another notch on his belt. I'm sorry, Ethan, but that's the reality." I thanked her and ended the call, my heart hammering in my chest. Rachel's words confirmed my worst fears. Derek wasn't just some random guy, he was a manipulative predator. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore, it was about humiliation. And I wasn't about to let it slide. That night, sleep was out of the question. My thoughts swirled endlessly, bouncing between anger, grief, and a simmering need for justice. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the blinds, I knew what I had to do. If Derek was the kind of man Rachel described, I needed proof, something undeniable to shatter whatever illusion Hannah had of him. As the sun rose, I drove to McKinley's. I didn't have a solid plan, but something told me Derek would be there. Guys like him thrived on attention, and bars were their natural hunting grounds. When I arrived, a few cars were already scattered across the parking lot, and faint laughter drifted out from the building. I parked across the street, pulled out my phone, and walked in. The bar wasn't as packed as the night before, but it was still buzzing with life. I found a spot near the back, tucked out of sight but with a clear view of the main floor. And there he was, Derek. He sat perched on a bar stool, completely at ease, like he owned the place. Two women flanked him, both laughing at something he'd said. His posture oozed confidence, and his grin was wide and effortless. He leaned in close to one of them, whispering in her ear. She giggled, playfully swatting his arm, but she didn't pull away. Quietly, I pulled out my phone and started recording. For the next 30 minutes, I watched Derek perform like he was the star of his own twisted show. He moved effortlessly from one woman to the next, dripping charm with every word and gesture. He hugged them, flirted shamelessly, and let his hands linger in places that made my stomach churn. At one point, he had his arm wrapped tightly around a woman's waist, whispering something into her ear while another woman beside him hung onto his every word. It was nauseating to watch, but I couldn't look away. Every move he made, every smirk he flashed, I caught it all on video. It wasn't just for me, it was for Hannah. She needed to see the truth, the real Derek, not the fantasy she'd convinced herself was real. By the time I left the bar, I had everything I needed. My phone was loaded with footage of Derek's antics, each clip more damning than the last. Sitting in my car, staring at the screen, a strange sense of calm washed over me. This wasn't just about catching Derek in the act, it was about taking back control. It was about ensuring that neither he nor Hannah could spin the truth to fit their narrative. When I got home, the video still played on a loop in my mind. Tomorrow, Hannah would see exactly who she'd thrown everything away for, and she'd have no one to blame but herself. As the morning light filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the living room floor, I sat there, phone in hand. My stomach churned with a mixture of anger and resolve. Each frame of Derek's performance was a stark reminder of Hannah's betrayal and the depths to which everything had unraveled. But this wasn't just about Derek. It was about Hannah, the choices she made that had dragged us to this point. I wasn't about to let her walk away from this without consequences. If she thought she could wreck everything we'd built and still come out ahead, she was dead wrong. I knew what needed to be done. It was time to get serious, to protect what was mine, and to make sure she didn't profit from the destruction she'd caused. I needed a lawyer. Scrolling through my phone, I tried to remember the name I'd seen on a billboard not too long ago. Jonathan Caldwell. Family law specialist. The ad had boasted a reputation for taking on tough cases and winning, especially in divorce proceedings. He wasn't cheap, but I didn't care. I needed someone ruthless, someone who wouldn't back down. I dialed the number, and after a few rings, a polished voice answered. Caldwell Law Offices. How can we assist you? I need to speak with Mr. Caldwell, I said, working to keep my voice steady. It's about a divorce. Of course, the receptionist replied smoothly. He has an opening this afternoon at 3 p.m. Will that work for you? Perfect, I said, jotting down the time. Thank you. The rest of the morning dragged by, each minute feeling like an hour. My mind replayed everything, Hannah's messages, the photos, the humiliating scene at the bar. Each memory was like pouring gasoline on the fire inside me. This wasn't just about ending our marriage, it was about ensuring Hannah couldn't twist this situation to her advantage. She needed to face the consequences of her choices, and I was determined to make sure she did. When 3 p.m. finally rolled around, I was ready. Caldwell's office was sleek and modern, with glass walls and dark wood accents that gave off an air of efficiency and professionalism. A young assistant escorted me into a private office where Jonathan Caldwell himself was waiting. He looked exactly how I'd imagined, sharp suit, calculating eyes, and a quiet confidence that immediately put me at ease. He gestured for me to sit as he extended a hand. Mr. Peterson, he said, his tone crisp. I understand you're here to discuss a divorce. That's right, I said, shaking his hand before sitting down across from him. And I'm not looking for a clean break. My wife cheated on me, and I want to make sure she doesn't walk away with anything. Caldwell nodded, leaning back slightly in his chair. I see. Adultery is a serious accusation. Do you have evidence? I pulled out my phone and placed it on the desk between us. Plenty, I said firmly. Messages, photos, videos. She's been seeing some guy, an old college friend, behind my back for months. And I have footage of him flirting with other women at a bar. He's not just some one-time mistake. He's a serial cheater. Caldwell raised an eyebrow slightly, but his expression remained composed. Picking up the phone, he began scrolling through the files I'd opened. After a moment, he nodded. This is strong evidence, he said. Very strong. Clear proof of infidelity can carry significant weight in court, especially if you're looking to limit her claims to marital assets. I want everything, I said, my voice unwavering. The house, the car, my savings. I earned it all. She doesn't deserve a dime. Caldwell nodded again, jotting notes on a legal pad. Understood. Have you and your wife signed a prenuptial agreement? No, I admitted, feeling a pang of regret. But the house is in my name, and I've been the primary earner for years. That works in your favor, Caldwell said. We'll need to document all financial contributions and liabilities. If she hasn't contributed significantly, we can argue she has no rightful claim to the majority of your assets. Her infidelity will further strengthen that argument. What about alimony? I asked. The thought of Hannah receiving any kind of financial support from me made my stomach turn. That depends, Caldwell said, leaning forward slightly. If we can demonstrate that her infidelity was a significant factor in the breakdown of the marriage, it's unlikely she'll be awarded spousal support. Judges tend to take a hard stance on cheating spouses, especially when there's substantial evidence. His words were exactly what I needed to hear. For the first time in days, I felt like I had a plan, a way to regain control of my life. Hannah had made her choices, and now she was going to face the consequences. I nodded, feeling a faint spark of hope flicker for the first time in days. Good. What's the next step? We'll start by filing for divorce, Caldwell explained, his tone matter-of-fact. From there, we'll serve her with the papers. Once she's officially notified, we can begin dividing the assets. In the meantime, I'll prepare to present the evidence we have. This could be a straightforward case, if she doesn't contest it. I let out a bitter chuckle. Oh, she'll fight. Hannah always fights. Then we'll be ready, Caldwell said, his calm demeanor unwavering. The more evidence you can provide, the stronger our case will be. Keep anything you find, bank statements, emails, receipts, anything that shows she's been spending money on this man or neglecting her marital responsibilities. It all helps. I left Caldwell's office with a clearer head than I'd had in days. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about taking back control, about reclaiming my life from the wreckage Hannah had caused. The texts, the photos, the videos, everything I'd gathered was now ammunition, and I intended to use it. On the drive home, my thoughts raced. I couldn't stop replaying how quickly everything had fallen apart. Hannah had destroyed the life we'd built, and now she was going to face the consequences. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a sense of control, a plan to follow, a way forward. The morning after my meeting with Caldwell, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, trying to focus on anything other than the mess my life had become. The house was eerily quiet without Hannah's presence, but I welcomed the silence. It was the space I needed to think clearly. That's when I heard it, a soft, hesitant knock at the door. It wasn't the kind of knock you hear from a stranger or delivery driver. I already knew who it was. Setting my mug down, I walked to the door, bracing myself. Sure enough, there she was, Hannah. Her makeup was smudged, her hair disheveled, and her eyes swollen from what must have been a long night of crying. She looked nothing like the confident, carefree woman I'd seen at McKinley's a few nights ago. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice cracking. "Can we talk?" I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "What's there to talk about, Hannah? You made your choices." Her lip quivered, and tears welled in her eyes. "I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But I wasn't thinking straight. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Didn't mean for it to happen?" "Hannah, you don't send romantic messages and intimate photos to someone for 2 months by accident." She took a shaky step closer, her voice trembling. "I was stupid. It didn't mean anything, Ethan. I love you. I want to fix this." I let out a cold, bitter laugh. "Fix this? You think you can just show up, cry a little, and I'll forget everything? You didn't just cheat, Hannah. You humiliated me." She flinched at my words but didn't back down. "Please, just give me a chance to explain." I sighed, stepping back and motioning for her to come inside. "Fine. But you're not going to like what I have to show you." She followed me into the living room, her eyes darting around nervously like she expected me to yell or throw something. Instead, I grabbed my phone from the table, opened the video I'd taken at McKinley's, and handed it to her. "Watch this," I said, my voice icy. Hannah hesitated, her hands trembling as she took the phone. Her eyes widened as the video played, her face draining of all color. On the screen was Derek, her so-called lover, flirting shamelessly with every woman in the bar. The way he leaned in close, whispered in their ears, touched their arms, and laughed with them, it was all there, plain as day. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. This can't be real. He wouldn't." "Oh, but he would," I said, crossing my arms. "And he does. Regularly, from what I've heard. Derek doesn't care about you, Hannah. You were just another conquest to him." Her tears spilled over as she stared at the screen, the reality of what she'd done, and who Derek really was, finally sinking in. But for me, there was no pity, no sympathy left. Just the cold satisfaction of knowing she couldn't deny the truth any longer. "While you were throwing away our marriage," I said, my voice cold, he was already lining up his next fling. Tears streamed down her face as she handed the phone back to me, her hands trembling. "I didn't know," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought he cared." "Yeah, well, you thought wrong," I replied, my tone cutting like a blade. "And now you're going to face the consequences of your choices. You didn't just cheat on me, Hannah. You destroyed everything we built together. And for what? Some liar who treats women like trophies." She sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands, her sobs muffled but raw. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Please, Ethan, give me another chance. I'll do anything." I stared at her, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Anything? Fine. Get ready for court." Her head shot up, her tear-streaked face filled with panic. "Court? Ethan, no. You can't do this." "I can and I will," I said firmly. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. We're filing for divorce, and I'm making sure you don't walk away with anything. You don't deserve it." Before she could respond, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, Jonathan Caldwell was calling. Perfect timing. I picked up, keeping my eyes locked on Hannah as I spoke. "Hello. Ethan," Caldwell said, his tone brisk and professional. "We've got a court date set. Next Friday at 10 a.m. I'll send you the details." "Thanks, Jonathan," I replied, a small sense of satisfaction creeping into my voice. "I'll be ready." I hung up and turned back to Hannah, who looked like the weight of the world had just dropped onto her shoulders. "You heard that," I said. "Friday, 10 a.m. I suggest you find yourself a lawyer." "Ethan, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Don't do this. We can work through this. I'll do anything to make it right." "It's too late, Hannah," I said, shaking my head slowly. "You made your bed. Now you get to lie in it." She sat there, her sobs growing louder as I turned and walked toward the door. I didn't want to hear any more excuses, nor did I have the patience for her tears. The damage was done, and there was no coming back from it. The days leading up to the court date were a blur of preparation. Caldwell worked tirelessly, going through every piece of evidence I'd collected, the videos, the messages, the photos. Each one painted a damning picture of Hannah's betrayal and Derek's shameless behavior. Revisiting those moments was like reopening a wound, but I knew it was necessary. This wasn't just about ending our marriage, it was about ensuring Hannah faced the full weight of her actions. Meanwhile, Hannah didn't stop trying to contact me. Calls, texts, emails, they came non-stop. Each one was more desperate than the last. She oscillated between begging for forgiveness and veiled threats about how she'd fight back in court. I ignored every single one. Her words didn't matter anymore. The facts spoke louder. On the morning of the hearing, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting my tie. My reflection stared back at me, tired, yes, but resolute. This wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself, but I was determined to come out of this stronger. When I arrived at the courthouse, Caldwell was already waiting outside. His briefcase was in hand, and his calm, confident demeanor steadied me. "Ethan," he greeted, offering a firm handshake. "Ready?" "Ready as I'll ever be," I replied, taking a deep breath. As we walked toward the building, I spotted Hannah sitting on a bench near the courtroom doors. She looked small and fragile, her hands twisting a tissue nervously. Beside her sat her lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in a tailored navy suit, leaning in and whispering something in her ear. Hannah's eyes met mine briefly, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across her face, regret, maybe, or fear. But it didn't matter. This wasn't the time for emotions. I had a goal, and I wasn't going to let her derail it. The courtroom was stark and imposing, with rows of polished wooden benches and a raised platform where the judge presided. As the proceedings began, a surge of adrenaline coursed through me. Caldwell laid out our case with razor-sharp precision, meticulously detailing the timeline of Hannah's affair and presenting the evidence I had gathered. The videos of Derek's behavior at the bar were particularly damning. As they played on the large screen for everyone to see, even Hannah's lawyer seemed visibly rattled. Hannah, on the other hand, squirmed uncomfortably in her seat, her face a deep shade of red. She avoided looking at me, keeping her eyes glued to the table in front of her. When it was her turn to speak, she tried to twist the narrative, painting herself as a victim of neglect and loneliness. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "But it wasn't all my fault. Our marriage wasn't perfect, and I—" "Stop," I said firmly, cutting her off mid-sentence. The judge frowned, but after a brief pause, allowed me to speak. "Hannah, don't you dare try to blame this on me," I said, my voice steady but filled with raw anger. "I worked hard every single day to provide for us. I trusted you, and you threw it all away. This isn't about a mistake. It's about choices. And you made yours." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. Hannah's tears began to flow again, but they felt hollow, like the final act of a play that had gone on far too long. By the time the hearing concluded, the judge had ruled almost entirely in my favor. The house, the savings, and even the car, everything was awarded to me. Hannah was left with little more than her personal belongings and a harsh dose of reality. As I left the courthouse with Caldwell, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a lingering anger that refused to fully subside. Hannah had taken so much from me, but she wouldn't take my future. Not anymore. Outside, Hannah was waiting near the steps. Her lawyer was gone, leaving her standing alone with her purse clutched tightly in her hands. When she saw me, she stepped forward hesitantly. "Ethan," she began, her voice small and trembling. I want to say I'm sorry. For everything." I stared at her for a long moment, memories of our life together flashing through my mind like an old film reel. There was a time when those words would have meant everything to me. But now, they meant nothing. "I hope you figure things out, Hannah," I said finally, my voice steady but devoid of warmth. "But we're done." She nodded, tears spilling down her face as I turned and walked away. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of freedom, like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had finally been lifted. In the days following the court hearing, life felt paradoxically lighter and heavier at the same time. The weight of betrayal had eased, but the scars it left behind were still fresh. There was no quick fix for that kind of pain, no fast-forward button to bypass the sleepless nights or the gnawing questions about how everything had fallen apart. A few days after the ruling, Hannah came to the house with a friend and a moving truck to gather her things. She worked quietly, methodically packing up her belongings. I stayed out of her way, not because I wanted to avoid her, but because I couldn't bear to watch her sift through what had once been our shared life. Each box she packed felt like another stab at what we'd lost, even though I knew deep down it was for the best. When she finally left, the silence in the house was deafening. I tried to drown it out with distractions, TV, work, cleaning, anything to keep my mind occupied. But no matter what I did, the memories of what I'd seen and heard crept back in, like shadows I couldn't escape. I knew I needed something more, something to anchor me, to help me move forward with purpose. One evening, as I scrolled through my phone, I found myself staring at the videos of Derek flirting with those women at the bar. I didn't need the evidence anymore, it had already served its purpose in court. But the anger it stirred in me was undeniable. How could Hannah have thrown away everything we had for someone like him? Derek was a fraud, a charmer with no substance, a manipulator who preyed on anyone foolish enough to fall for his act. And that's when it hit me. Hannah wasn't the only one. Derek had likely done this to countless others, leaving behind a trail of broken relationships and shattered lives. The thought gnawed at me, and for the first time, my anger shifted focus. It wasn't just about what he'd done to me, it was about what he'd done to others, and what he might still be doing. The thought made my blood boil. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about exposing Derek for the fraud he truly was. He had built his life on lies and manipulation, and I wasn't going to stand by while he continued to hurt people. If no one else would hold him accountable, I would. Derek's social media profiles weren't hard to find. Subtlety wasn't his strong suit. His pages were littered with photos of him at parties, arms slung around different women, always grinning like he'd just won a prize. The comments on his posts told their own story, flirty compliments from women, over-the-top encouragement from his buddies, and the occasional cryptic remark from someone clearly burned by him. It didn't take long to piece together his patterns. Derek had favorite bars and restaurants, tagging himself in posts and stories like he was leaving breadcrumbs. He craved attention, and his online presence was practically a roadmap of his exploits. As I studied his posts, a plan started to form in my mind. I wasn't someone who sought revenge. But this wasn't about vengeance, it was about justice. Derek needed to face the consequences of his actions, and I wasn't going to let him keep manipulating and hurting others without stepping in. The following weekend, I went back to McKinley's. I wasn't there to drink or socialize. I was there to observe, to document. As expected, Derek showed up, strutting into the bar like he owned the place. He moved through the room with ease, working it like it was his personal stage. I stayed in the shadows, phone in hand, ready to record. And, predictably, Derek didn't disappoint. Over the course of the night, he flirted with at least 4 different women, each interaction more bold and calculated than the last. He bought drinks, leaned in close to whisper in their ears, and flashed that same smug grin that had fooled Hannah. Every move, every touch, every fake laugh, I captured it all on camera. By the time I left the bar, I had everything I needed. But this time, I wasn't just gathering evidence for my own closure. This was bigger than me. Derek's behavior wasn't a one-time mistake or a moment of weakness, it was a pattern. And it was time the world knew who Derek Adams really was. Over the next few days, I compiled the footage into a single video. I added captions to highlight his actions, the flirtations, the lingering touches, the empty promises he delivered with his eyes and his words. By the time I finished, I had something that couldn't be ignored. I didn't post it right away. Instead, I sat with it, weighing the consequences of what I was about to do. This wasn't just about Hannah anymore. It was about every woman Derek had deceived, every relationship he'd ruined. People like him thrived in the shadows, hiding behind charm and lies. It was time to drag him into the light. The next morning, I uploaded the video to a private account. I sent it out anonymously to everyone who needed to see it, mutual friends, women I recognized from his social media, and even the managers of the bars he frequented. My message was simple, just enough to expose Derek for the person he truly was. By the end of the day, the video was circulating. Comments poured in from people who had their own stories about Derek or knew someone who did. His untouchable reputation, built on lies and charisma, was crumbling before my eyes. It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase what had happened between Hannah and me, or heal the scars left behind. But it was a start. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was reclaiming some control, not just over my own life, but over the narrative Derek had tried to spin. And that was a victory I wasn't about to let go of.